Because I have. And it wasn't an abstract fear, the kind that appears in existential crises in the middle of the night. It was a slow, visceral realization that sets in when you finally stop to watch the game being played around you. While you hesitate, considering the impact of your actions on others, weighing moral consequences, someone without these constraints has already taken what was yours, the promotion you deserved, the recognition for the project you carried on your back, the seat at the table where important decisions are made, and you stand there paralyzed, wondering, where is the reward for doing the right thing? Where is that cosmic justice they promised you as a child? The idea that good people prosper and bad people pay for what they do. The most uncomfortable truth is not that bad people win. That's just a symptom. The real wound, the one that burns silently, is another. You waited. You waited for the universe to recognize your goodness. You waited for your ethics to be enough. You waited for not having to get your hands dirty, because doing the right thing should be enough. And while you waited, frozen in that comfortable illusion, you gave up the only real power you ever had. The power to act, to move, to exist fully without apology. Because at some point in your life you were taught that being strong was synonymous with being cruel, that ambition was selfishness in disguise, that power corrupts always, and you believed it. You believed it so much that you built a moral prison around yourself and called it virtue. But there is something even more disturbing about this equation. It's not just that you waited, it's that this waiting made you an accomplice to your own defeat. Every time you saw someone walk all over you and didn't react, every time you swallowed injustice in the name of keeping the peace, every time you chose to be understanding when you should have been firm, you reinforced the pattern. You taught the world that you accept crumbs, that you won't fight for what's yours, that your kindness has no limits and therefore no value. And the world, that indifferent and pragmatic place, learned its lesson. While you waited for recognition for being good, the world taught you that kindness without action is just a lack of courage disguised as morality. What if the problem was never the world outside? What if the real issue is what you did to yourself while waiting for justice that would never come? The contract was signed before you even knew how to read. There was no negotiation, no fine print you could review before agreeing. You were simply born into it, and from your earliest years of consciousness you learned the rules. Be polite, share your toys, respect others, work hard, do the right thing. And in the end, when everything falls into place, when you have done your part, the universe will reward you. This is the foundational narrative that spans generations, cultures, belief systems. It's what your parents repeated, what school reinforced, what religion sanctified as unquestionable moral truth. And you believed it. How could you not? It was a beautiful, fair story that transformed the chaos of the world into something understandable. If you were good, good things would happen. If someone was bad, eventually they would pay the price. There was order, there was meaning, there was hope. Except no one told you that this order was a comforting illusion. That this meaning was a narrative constructed to keep children obedient and adults docile. And that this hope, as beautiful as it seemed, was the slowest poison there is because it made you wait instead of act. Think about how this took root in you. Every time you were praised for being good, every time you earned a gold star for exemplary behavior, every time your proud parents said that's the way to do it, you weren't just learning values. You were being conditioned to associate obedience with safety, conformity with approval, passivity with virtue, and most insidiously, you were learning that recognition would come automatically as a natural reward for following the rules. No one taught you that sometimes you have to demand recognition, that sometimes you have to fight for what is yours, that kindness without assertiveness is not a virtue, it is merely a lack of voice. Then you grew up. You entered the job market, entered into relationships, entered into the brutal complexity of adult life. And you were confronted with a reality that doesn't fit the contract. You saw the colleague who lied on their resume get promoted while you, who built your career with honesty, remained stagnant. You saw the manipulative leader celebrated as a visionary, while you, who treated everyone with respect, were considered too weak to lead. You saw relationships where those who cared the most suffered the most, while those who played with indifference came out unscathed. And every time this happened, something inside you broke a little more. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was confusion. It was the feeling of playing a game whose rules had changed without anyone telling you. And worst of all, you began to doubt yourself. Not about the world, about yourself. Am I not good enough? Am I doing something wrong? Maybe I need to work harder, be more patient, prove my worth more. Because admitting that the system doesn't work the way you were taught would mean admitting that you wasted years, maybe decades, operating under false premises. And that admission hurts too much. So you double down. You work longer hours. You're even more understanding. You sacrifice even more of yourself. And as you do, the distance between you and those who never believed in the contract only increases. You become a hostage to your own kindness. trapped in a cycle where each disappointment convinces you that you need to be even nicer to finally be recognized. Psychologists call this the just world fallacy. It's the cognitive tendency to believe that the world operates on a system of perfect moral meritocracy, that people reap exactly what they sow. And when we encounter evidence to the contrary, when we see undeserved suffering or undeserved success, our minds juggle to preserve the illusion. He must have worked hard in some way we don't see. She must have done something wrong to deserve this. Any explanation will do, as long as it keeps intact the belief that there is cosmic justice operating behind the scenes. Because to admit otherwise is to admit something terrifying, that you are alone, that there is no invisible judge ensuring that everything balances out in the end, that kindness is not a universal currency, and that the universe is deeply indifferent to your moral efforts. This illusion has a brutal psychological cost. It turns victims of unfair circumstances into culprits of their own misery. If the world is fair and you are suffering, then the fault can only be yours. And that creates an additional layer of pain. Not just the injustice itself, but the shame of not being able to overcome it. You start to hide your frustrations because admitting them would be admitting personal failure. And the more you hide, the more isolated you become. The more convinced that the problem lies with you, not with the broken contract you were sold. It's a peculiar loneliness. You're surrounded by people playing the same game, but everyone is pretending that the rules work. Everyone secretly wondering why only they seem to be losing. And there's another, even more perverse layer. This belief in automatic justice prevents you from seeing systemic patterns. When someone exploits you, you personalize it. What did I do wrong? When someone unscrupulous wins, you pathologize them. That person must be sick. But you never stop to ask, what if it's not an exception? What if it's the norm? What if the system actually rewards those who act without moral hesitation and punishes those who passively wait for recognition? This question is dangerous because it forces you to choose. Either accept that you've been deceived and radically change your stance, or continue to believe in the illusion and remain exactly where you are. And do you know what is most dangerous about this belief? It is not the disappointment it inevitably brings. It is the paralysis it generates while it is still intact. Because if you genuinely believe that being good is enough, that doing the right thing guarantees reward, then you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to position yourself strategically. You don't need to negotiate for what you deserve. You don't have to make difficult choices that sometimes upset those around you. You can remain passive, hoping that your goodness will speak for itself. And that's exactly what keeps you in place. This passivity disguised as virtue, this waiting disguised as patience, this inertia disguised as humility. Meanwhile, there is another type of person, people who never signed that contract. Or if they did, they tore it up at the first opportunity. They looked at the world and asked a different question. Not what is fair, but what works. And the answer they found was simple, brutal, and effective. The world does not reward intention. It rewards results. It doesn't matter if you are morally superior if you never translate that into concrete action. It doesn't matter if you're right if you can't articulate or defend your position. And it definitely doesn't matter if you waited patiently for your turn if someone else simply took what they wanted. They understood something that you still resist accepting, that resources are scarce, that attention is limited, that opportunities don't wait, and that hesitating for any reason, including noble reasons, is a fatal competitive disadvantage. And here's the part that hurts the most. They're not necessarily wrong. So who are these people? The ones who win while you're left behind, brooding with resentment and moral confusion. The temptation is to paint them as monsters, one-dimensional villains, beings devoid of humanity, calculating psychopaths who take pleasure in the destruction of others. It's comforting to think of them that way, because if they are monsters, then you are right not to be like them. Your defeat becomes a virtue. You lost because you refused to be cruel. But the reality is more complex and for that very reason more disturbing. Most of these people are not cruel. They don't wake up in the morning planning to hurt someone. They don't feel sadistic satisfaction when they step on others. What sets them apart is not malice. It's the absence of internal moral restraints that you didn't even know you had until you started observing how they work. While you weigh consequences, consider other people's feelings, and hesitate when faced with ambiguous decisions, they simply act, not because they are brave or because they have superior ethics, but because they don't carry the psychological weight that you carry. They don't feel guilt in the same way. They don't internalize emotional responsibility for others. And that, in competitive contexts, is a brutal evolutionary advantage. Think of a corporate scenario. Two candidates competing for the same promotion. You know you're more qualified, that you've delivered more results, that you've built solid relationships with the team. But at the decisive meeting, the other candidate presents the same results you achieved, only as if they were exclusively his merit. He omits your contribution, exaggerates his own role, rewrites the narrative with unshakable confidence. And you stand there shocked, thinking about how to confront this without seeming petty, without creating conflict, without violating your own code of conduct. While you hesitate, while you calculate the right, morally defensible response, the other candidate has already secured the position. He didn't hesitate, not because he's smarter or more talented, but because he doesn't feel what you feel when he manipulates the truth. And then, when you finally process what happened, the anger comes. But it's an impotent anger because you know that lowering yourself to his level would mean betraying who you are. So you swallow it, you rationalize. In the end, the truth always comes out. People like that never really prosper. But while you console yourself with these narratives, he is already in the higher position, making decisions that affect your career, consolidating power. And the truth never comes out, because the truth, in the real world, has no voice of its own. Only those who articulate it with conviction have a voice. And he has it, you don't. And it's not just the absence of guilt, it's also a different relationship with risk. You've been conditioned to see security as a virtue, to preserve what you have, not to risk the certain for the uncertain, because that would be irresponsible, reckless. They don't have that conditioning. They bet big, take risks you would consider insane, and when they lose, they don't paralyze themselves with self-flagellation. They just recalibrate and try again. This resilience in the face of failure, combined with the willingness to try what others consider too daring, creates a cycle of opportunities that you never access. Because you only try when you are sure. And certainty is a luxury that rarely exists in situations that really matter. There is also the question of empathy. Not that they lack it. Many are perfectly capable of understanding what others feel. But that understanding does not paralyze them. They can see that a decision will hurt someone and still make that decision if it is strategically necessary. While you get stuck in mental loops trying to find a solution that doesn't hurt anyone, a solution that usually doesn't exist, they have already cut off the toxic relationship, fired the incompetent person, ended the unsustainable partnership, and they moved on, not coldly, simply with the ability to prioritize their goals above the need to please or protect everyone around them. An evolutionary psychologist would say that these characteristics, low-risk aversion, reduced sensitivity to guilt, ability to act despite social disapproval, have been selected over millennia because in environments of scarcity and brutal competition, they work. Not in all contexts, not for long-term group cohesion, but for the individual who possesses them. In situations of direct competition for limited resources, they are undeniable advantages. And here is the paradox that no one wants to admit. The modern world, despite all its sophistication, still operates fundamentally on these terms. Resources are limited, attention is limited, power is limited. And in any system of limited resources, those who act first, those who act without hesitation, have an advantage over those who wait, ponder, seek consensus. And there's more. They don't carry the burden of moral consistency that you carry. You need your actions to align with your identity, with the image you have of yourself as a good person. This need for consistency holds you back. They don't have that problem. They can be generous in one context and ruthless in another, without it causing cognitive dissonance. This moral flexibility, which you would call hypocrisy, is in practice strategic adaptability. They do what the situation demands, not what their moral identity allows. And in a complex world where contexts change rapidly, this adaptability wins out over rigidity. So while you're stuck in a moral dilemma, trying to be good, they've already moved on. Not because they're bad, but because they never believed they needed to be good in the way you believe. And with each cycle that repeats itself, you hesitating, them acting, the distance between you grows, not in competence, not in intelligence, but in concrete, tangible results that the world rewards and celebrates. And then comes the question you don't want to ask, but which whispers in the back of your mind every time you see this happen. Could it be that the problem isn't the world out there? Could it be that the problem is what you still believe? Because maybe, just maybe, you're not losing because the world is unfair. Maybe you're losing because you're still playing by the rules of a game that never existed. While they're playing chess, you're waiting for someone to reward you for being nice. And that waiting, that belief, is exactly what keeps you where you are. But wait, before you convince yourself that the solution is to simply abandon all ethics and become like them, there's something that needs to be said. Something that will bother you even more than everything that has come before. Because the truth is not only that you were taught to wait for justice, it's that the very morality you hold so dear, the one that makes you feel superior even in defeat, may not be what you think it is. It may in fact be a survival strategy disguised as virtue. And that changes everything. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher, looked at human morality and asked a radical question. What if what we call good and evil are not universal truths, but merely inventions created by those in power, or by those who are not. He proposed something disturbing. There are two fundamental types of morality that compete for dominance in human history: the morality of the master and the morality of the slave. And to understand this distinction is to understand why you are where you are. The morality of the master is the morality of those who have power and are not afraid to exercise it. For these people, what is good is linked to strength, creation, the ability to shape the world according to their own will. Courage is good, ambition is good, assertiveness is good, and what is bad? Weakness, hesitation, dependence. This morality does not arise from resentment or from trying to control others. It arises from a pure affirmation of one's own existence. I am strong, therefore strength is a virtue. I create, therefore creation is valuable. It is a morality that does not ask for permission, that does not seek external validation. It simply is. Now the slave's morality. This is different, and this is where things get uncomfortable. The slave's morality is born not of strength, but of powerlessness. It is created by those who do not have the power to dominate directly, so they must find another way to survive psychologically in a world controlled by the strong. And the solution they find is ingenious. Reverse values. If I cannot be strong, then strength is evil. If I cannot be ambitious, then ambition is selfishness. If I cannot impose my will, then humility and obedience are the true virtues. And there you have it. An entire moral system has been created that glorifies exactly what the weak can do: suffer in silence, obey, sacrifice themselves, wait. And here's the masterstroke of this morality. It not only reverses values, it demonizes the strong. The powerful are not just different, they are evil, cruel, sinful, tyrants. And the weak are not just weak, they are noble, pure, virtuous, blessed. This reversal turns defeat into moral victory. I didn't win because I'm too good for this dirty world. See how it works? It's a way to preserve self-esteem when you have no real power. It's survival psychology converted into moral code. And before you protest, before you say, but wait, compassion is genuinely valuable, humility is genuinely important. Yes, it can be. Nietzsche isn't saying that these qualities are inherently bad. What he's saying is that when they become the only recognized virtues, when strength is automatically seen as oppression and assertiveness as arrogance, then we're not talking about ethics. We're talking about a morality that has been designed to keep the powerful in check and console the powerless. It is a reactive morality, born of resentment, not of the affirmation of life. And that puts you in a difficult position. Because it is quite possible that much of what you call being a good person is in fact this slave morality operating in you. That voice that says, don't be too ambitious, that's selfish. Where does it come from? That voice that says, don't impose yourself, you'll seem arrogant. Who benefits from it? That voice that turns every expression of personal power into something morally suspect. Is it protecting you or imprisoning you? Think about it. How many times have you failed to pursue something you really wanted because it would be selfish? How many times have you swallowed an injustice because creating conflict is ugly? How many times have you nullified yourself in a relationship or work environment because being too assertive is aggressive? And while you were doing that, feeling virtuous, who was moving freely through the world? Who was making decisions, claiming space, building power? Exactly those who never internalized this moral code. Those who, consciously or unconsciously, operate under something closer to the moral code of the master. And here is the most bitter revelation. While you glorify humility and demonize power, you leave power in the hands of those who do not have your scruples. You withdraw from the game, convince yourself that this is nobility, and call your absence virtue. But the world does not stop turning because you have decided to be pure. Decisions continue to be made. Resources continue to be distributed. Power continues to be exercised. Only now, without you, without your perspective, without your values, you abdicated and called it ethics. Nietzsche saw this as a tragedy, not because he glorified tyrants, but because he saw genuinely good people sabotaging themselves, imprisoning themselves in a morality that prevented them from exerting real influence in the world. And the result? A world dominated by those who are not hindered by these moral constraints. The worst thrive not because they are smarter or more competent, but because the best refuse to play the game, convinced that playing is dirty by definition. So what to do about it? Completely abandon compassion, empathy, consideration for others? Become a selfish tyrant? No, because there is a third way. A path that is neither the passivity of slave morality nor the blind brutality of those who seek power for power's sake. It is the path of those who understand the game but refuse to be defined by it. Of those who develop real strength, not over others but over themselves. And to understand this, we need to talk about what Nietzsche really proposed as an ideal. Not the tyrant, but something much more interesting. The Ubermensch, the beyond man, probably the most misunderstood concept in all of Western philosophy. When people hear this term, they immediately imagine some kind of domineering superhuman, stepping on everyone, free from any moral restrictions, a glorified predator. And it doesn't help that historically this concept has been distorted and appropriated by terrible ideologies. But what Nietzsche really meant by Ubermensch has nothing to do with dominating others. It has to do with transcending oneself. The Ubermensch is someone who looks at these two moralities, that of the master and that of the slave, and realizes that both are limitations. The slave morality traps you in resentment, passivity, the glorification of suffering. But the simple pursuit of power over others, that insatiable thirst for domination, also traps you. It makes you a slave to your own insecurity, to the constant need to prove superiority, to crush rivals. The tyrant is not free. He is a hostage to his own fear of being weak. That is why he constantly needs to demonstrate strength. That is why he never rests. The Ubermensch, on the other hand, is free from both of these prisons. He creates his own values. He does not passively accept what society says is good or bad. He does not bow to what tradition, religion, or culture determine to be moral truth. But he also does not seek validation through the domination of others. His strength is internal, self-generated. He doesn't need you to recognize his power because his power doesn't depend on you. He doesn't need to crush you to feel elevated because his elevation comes from self-improvement, not comparison. Think about the difference. The tyrant and the one you see winning around you is always in conquest mode, always proving something, always unsure that if they stop for a second, someone will take their place. They accumulate power but never have enough. They build empires but live in terror of the possibility of loss. They crush rivals but create enemies wherever they go. And in the end, when they fall, and tyrants always fall, they leave nothing of value behind, only destruction and resentment. Observe how this works in practice. Think of a corporate leader who reached the top by stepping on everyone. He has the position, the salary, the status, but he lives in paranoia. Every meeting is an opportunity for someone to expose him. Every competent subordinate is a potential threat. He cannot truly delegate because he trusts no one. He cannot admit mistakes because that would show weakness. He can't have genuine relationships because everyone around him either fears him or is waiting for a chance to bring him down. He won, but he is trapped in a fortress of loneliness and mistrust. That's not freedom. It's just a gilded cage with a privileged view. The Ubermensch plays a different game, an infinite game, not a finite one. He is not trying to beat you because he is not competing with you. He is competing with who he was yesterday. His measure of success is not how many subordinates he has, how many rivals he has eliminated, how much power he has accumulated over others. It is how much he has expanded, how much he has created, how much he has surpassed himself. And because his source of power is internal, it is sustainable. It does not depend on external circumstances. It cannot be taken away by a reversal of fortune or a change in the political landscape. It is his, intrinsically. And here's something crucial that most people don't understand. The Ubermensch is not someone without ethics. He is someone who has built his own ethics. He understands that morality is not a list of rules handed down by some external authority. It is something you forge through your choices, your experiences, your reflection on what really matters. He can choose to be compassionate, not because he is obliged to, but because he recognizes genuine value in compassion. He can choose to be honest, not out of fear of divine or social punishment, but because he has decided that integrity is part of who he wants to be. The difference is that these choices come from within. They are self-imposed, not externally mandatory. This means that he can also choose not to be compassionate when the situation calls for firmness. He can break with honesty if protecting the truth means allowing greater injustice. He is not a slave to his own moral rules. He owns them. They do not own him. And this conscious flexibility, not the abandonment of ethics, but the refusal to be imprisoned by a rigid code that does not make sense in all contexts, is what allows him to navigate the world effectively without losing his soul in the process. You see, the problem with those who operate under slave morality is that they believe that any exercise of power is automatically corrupt. So they abdicate power. And in doing so, they ensure that only the corrupt will have power. The problem with those who operate under brute master morality is that they see power as an end in itself. So they become empty hoarders, always dissatisfied, always insecure. The Ubermensch understands that power is a tool, neutral. What matters is what you use it for and how you relate to it. Think about how different it would be if you operated this way. Imagine not needing anyone's approval to make decisions about your own life. Imagine not feeling guilty for setting boundaries, for saying no, for prioritizing your own development. Imagine not being afraid of being judged because you know who you are and what you value, and other people's opinions, while they may be interesting, do not define you. Imagine having absolute clarity about your principles, but the flexibility to adapt them to different contexts without feeling hypocritical. This is not fantasy. It is possible, but it requires something you have been avoiding: total responsibility for your own existence. And if you've come this far wondering, but how does that help me in the real world, where unscrupulous people continue to take advantage of me? Here's the answer. You need to stop choosing between being a victim or a villain. Those aren't the only options. You can cultivate real power over your own life, your choices, your direction, without becoming predatory. You can learn to set firm boundaries without cruelty. You can claim your space without crushing anyone. You can be assertive without being aggressive, strategic without being manipulative. But to do that, you need to abandon the illusion that the world should automatically reward you for being good. You need to accept that building a meaningful life requires action, risk, difficult choices, and that doing these things doesn't make you bad. It makes you alive. It makes you an agent of your own existence rather than a spectator complaining about the injustices of the audience. You need to understand that strength and ethics are not opposites. They are complements. That compassion without assertiveness is impotence, and that humility without self-respect is self-annihilation. And you know what? While you were reading this, while you were processing these ideas, something important was happening. You were beginning to wonder if it is possible, really possible, to integrate strength and ethics, power and compassion, strategy and authenticity. And the answer is yes, absolutely. But not by following the rules you were taught, not by expecting the world to be fair, and definitely not by pretending that giving up power is a virtue. It's time to stop hiding behind kindness and start building real strength, not to crush anyone, but to finally stop being crushed. So how does that translate into practice? How do you compete in a world that rewards the unscrupulous without becoming one of them? How do you develop real power without losing your humanity in the process? The answer lies in something most people don't even know exists: strategic empathy. And no, that's not a contradiction. It's actually one of the most sophisticated skills you can develop. Strategic empathy doesn't mean manipulating people by pretending to care about them. It means deeply understanding how others think, what motivates them, what their insecurities and ambitions are, and using that understanding not to exploit them, but to navigate interactions more effectively. It's the difference between being naive and being aware, between projecting your values onto others and seeing others as they really are. You see, one of the biggest mistakes ethical people make is assuming that everyone operates under the same moral code. You value honesty, so you assume that verbal agreements will be honored. You value loyalty, so you can't imagine that someone would betray you after years of partnership. You value fairness, so you expect that the truth will eventually prevail in disputes. And every time you make these assumptions, you put yourself in a vulnerable position in front of those who don't share these values. And it's not just naivety, it's psychological projection. You literally can't imagine how someone can operate so differently from you. How can he look me in the eye and lie so easily? Because for him, lying doesn't cause the same discomfort it causes you. There is no internal conflict. There is no gnawing guilt. It is simply a tool he uses when convenient. And while you are shocked trying to understand how someone can be like that, he has already achieved his goal and moved on. Strategic empathy means recognizing that not everyone plays by the same rules. And instead of being outraged by this or trying to convince these people to change, you simply adjust your expectations and your strategies. Are you dealing with someone who has a history of breaking agreements? Document everything. Put clear terms in writing. Create contractual consequences. Not because you are distrustful by nature, but because you are strategic enough not to entrust your security to the goodwill of someone who has already proven they don't have it. Are you in an environment where the loudest voice is the one that is heard, even if it's talking nonsense? Learn to articulate your ideas clearly and firmly. Don't expect your work to speak for itself, because in many contexts, whoever controls the narrative wins, not whoever is right. This doesn't mean becoming loud or arrogant. It means recognizing that communication is a skill, and that if you have something valuable to contribute, it's your responsibility to make sure you're heard. Humble silence may seem virtuous, but in practice, it's just voluntary invisibility. Are you noticing that a colleague is subtly sabotaging you, taking credit for your work, or spreading doubts about your competence? Strategic empathy means understanding why. Does this person feel threatened by you? Are they insecure about their own position? Are they trying to impress someone specific? Understanding the motivation doesn't mean accepting the behavior. It means having information to respond effectively. Maybe you document your contributions better. Maybe you set clearer boundaries on collaborations. Maybe, if necessary, you have a direct but firm conversation about expectations. The point is, you act, you don't react. You choose your response based on understanding, not emotion. And there's another layer that's equally important. Strategic empathy also means recognizing your own self-destructive patterns. How many times have you accepted less than you deserved because you didn't want to seem greedy? How many times have you avoided negotiating because if they really valued me, they would offer me what I'm worth without me having to ask? How many times have you stayed in toxic situations because giving up would mean quitting? These are not virtues. They are self-sabotage disguised as moral principles. Think about it. When you silently accept less than you deserve, you are not being noble. You are teaching people to devalue you. When you don't negotiate, hoping that they will recognize your value spontaneously, you are not being humble. You are being passive and transferring your responsibility to others. When you remain in environments that drain you, you are not being resilient. You are being masochistic, calling self-destruction perseverance. Developing inner power means confronting these tendencies with brutal honesty. It means recognizing that asking for what you deserve is not greed, it is self-respect. That setting firm boundaries is not selfishness, it is mental health. That leaving unsustainable situations is not weakness, it is wisdom. But none of that happens if you continue to operate under slave morality, where any assertion of self is automatically suspect. What about fear? Because deep down, much of what prevents good people from exercising power is fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of losing approval, fear of being alone. This fear is understandable. We are social animals, and exclusion from the group meant death for most of our evolutionary history. But in the modern world, this fear is often disproportionately inflated. Most of the things you fear are not real threats to your survival. They are just discomforts that you have learned to avoid. Developing inner power requires befriending discomfort. It means being willing to have difficult conversations. It means risking displeasing some people in order to stay true to what matters. It means sometimes being alone for a while until you find people who truly align with who you are. This is not easy, but the alternative is to spend your whole life contorting yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, waiting for approval from people whose values you don't even share. And there's something else that needs to be said about ethical power versus predatory power, because that distinction is fundamental. Predatory power is always about subtraction. I gain by taking from you. My elevation requires your diminishment. It's a zero-sum game where every win creates a loser, and with that, a resentful person. This type of power is unstable because it generates constant resistance. The person you stepped on is waiting for the opportunity to retaliate. The loyalty you bought with fear evaporates the second you show weakness. Ethical power, on the other hand, is about creation. I build something of value. I develop a rare skill. I create solutions to real problems. I cultivate relationships based on mutual respect, not forced subordination. This type of power is sustainable because it does not depend on diminishing anyone. In fact, it can often elevate others in the process. When you are genuinely competent, when you create real value, people want to be associated with you, not out of fear, but by choice. And that's the difference between an empire built on terror and a legacy built on contribution. So when you develop strategic empathy, when you cultivate inner power, when you learn to position yourself in the world without having to crush anyone, you're not just surviving better. You're building something more durable than any tyranny. You're creating real influence based on real value, sustained by real strength. And unlike the tyrant who always lives in fear of losing what they have, you can rest easy knowing that your power comes from within. No one can take that away from you, because it wasn't stolen, it was built. And that difference changes everything about how you move through the world and how the world responds to you. But there's something I haven't told you yet, something that completely changes how you should look at this whole dynamic. Because so far it may seem like I'm saying that the unscrupulous simply win, build empires and live happily ever after, while you, with your principles, are left eating dust. But that's not the whole story. In fact, it's not even half of it. The truth is that power built on exploitation, manipulation, and fear has an expiration date. It always has. It always will. Not because of some magical cosmic justice that eventually balances things out, but because of something much simpler and more brutal: structural instability. Tyrants fall, not because the universe is fair, but because tyranny is unsustainable by design. Think about how it works. When you build power by stepping on people, every person you step on becomes a potential point of failure in your system. Every alliance forced by fear is an alliance that dissolves the second you show weakness. Every subordinate who obeys out of terror is secretly rooting for your downfall, waiting for the right moment to abandon you, or worse, to actively contribute to your collapse. You haven't built a foundation. You've built a minefield, and you're walking on it every day praying you don't step wrong. Look at history. How many dictators died old, peaceful, surrounded by people who genuinely loved them? Almost none. Most ended up betrayed by their own allies, assassinated, exiled, or living in constant paranoia until the end. And it's no different on a smaller scale. That tyrannical boss everyone feared. Eventually, someone higher up in the food chain realizes that he creates more problems than he solves, because no one who is genuinely productive wants to work under terror. That manipulative partner. Eventually, the other partners realize they can't trust him and find ways to remove him before he hurts them too. And there is something even deeper going on. Predatory power does not generate loyalty. It generates temporary conformity. And conformity does not build anything lasting. It does not inspire innovation. It does not cultivate excellence. People do the bare minimum to avoid punishment, but they never give their best. Why would they? They know that any success will be appropriated, any mistake will be used against them. So organizations built on fear are paradoxically fragile. They appear solid on the outside. Clear hierarchy, apparent obedience. But inside they are rotting. It's only a matter of time before they collapse. And what about the individual tyrant? The one you see thriving around you? He pays a psychological price that you don't see. Because no matter how many victories he accumulates, he never rests. He never knows if the people around him are genuine or just calculating the best moment to betray him. He can't trust anyone because he himself is not trustworthy, and he projects that onto others. They cannot admit vulnerability because they have built their entire identity on appearing strong. And that loneliness, that constant tension, that inability to have real human connections, it corrodes. Slowly, silently, but it corrodes. Have you ever stopped to observe people like this up close? Behind the facade of success, there is often emptiness, superficial or non-existent relationships, addictions to cope with anxiety, chronic insomnia, outbursts of uncontrolled anger when things don't go exactly as planned, because they are constantly in survival mode, even when they have already won. Their nervous system cannot relax, and that is not victory. It is imprisonment with invisible walls. So when you look at someone like that and feel envy, when you think, I wish I had that lack of scruples, that ability to just roll over everything, understand, you're not envying strength. You're envying a strategy that works in the short term but is self-destructive in the long term. You're seeing the first 5 chapters of the story and ignoring how it ends. And it almost always ends badly. But here's the last and most important revelation in this section. You don't have to wait for them to fall. You don't have to root for others to fail to justify your own choices. Because if you build power the right way, through real value, genuine competence, relationships based on mutual respect, you're not competing with them. You're playing a completely different game. A game where victory doesn't mean destroying rivals, but building something that outlives you. A game where you don't have to constantly defend your position, because your position is sustained by real contribution, not intimidation or manipulation. And while they are stuck in the cycle of conquering, defending, attacking, you are free to truly create, to truly live, to have genuine relationships because the people around you chose to be there, they weren't coerced, to sleep peacefully because you don't have a list of enemies waiting for your weakness, to age with dignity because you have built a legacy based on something other than temporary domination. That doesn't mean you'll be spared challenges. It doesn't mean that unscrupulous people won't occasionally hurt you, but it does mean you don't have to become like them to thrive. More importantly, it means that what you build lasts. While their empires are sandcastles waiting for the next tide, what you build has a foundation. And in the end, not in some distant heaven, but here in this life, that makes all the difference between merely existing and truly living. And now we come to the point that matters, the only point that really matters. Because you can understand all about master morality and slave morality. You can perfectly understand how tyrants operate and why they fall. You can be absolutely clear about strategic empathy and inner power. But if you haven't asked the right question, none of that changes your life. And the right question isn't, why do the worst people win? It never was. The right question is, why did I keep waiting? Why did you stand still while others moved? Why did you accept crumbs, hoping that eventually someone would recognize your value? Why did you build an entire identity around being the good person, the patient person, the person who does the right thing, and then use that identity as an excuse to never really fight for what you wanted? Why did you turn kindness into a shield against the responsibility to act? This is the truth that no one wants to hear, but it needs to be said. You are not just a victim of an unfair world. You are a co-creator of your current situation, not because you deserve to suffer, not because you are weak or incompetent, but because you chose repeatedly to believe in a narrative that kept you safe in passivity, And while you were safe, you were stagnant. Think about how many times you had the opportunity to take a stand and didn't. How many times you could have negotiated and didn't. How many times you saw injustice happening, to you or to others, and remained silent because you didn't want to cause trouble. Each of those times you made a choice, not consciously perhaps, but you did. You chose comfort over growth, approval over authenticity, the illusion of being virtuous over the reality of being effective. And the reason this is so hard to accept is because it destroys the victim narrative you've built. It's easier to blame the system, blame the unscrupulous, blame society, blame anything external. Because if the problem is out there, you don't have to change. You can continue to wait for the world to adjust to your values. But what if the problem, or at least part of it, is how you responded to the world? Then the responsibility is yours. And responsibility is scary, because it comes with the obligation to act. But here's the liberating paradox. Accepting responsibility is also regaining power. As long as you are a victim of circumstances, you're at their mercy. You have no control. But the moment you recognize, I contributed to this through my inaction, my passivity, my fear-based choices, at that moment you also recognize that you can make different choices, that you always could, and that you can start now. Kindness is not weakness. It never has been. Compassion is not naivety. Ethics is not a disadvantage. But kindness without assertiveness is just a lack of voice. Compassion without limits is just self-annihilation. And ethics without strategy is just theory that doesn't survive contact with reality. What you need is not to abandon your values. It's to integrate strength into them. Stop seeing strength and ethics as opposites and start seeing them as complementary, indispensable to each other. Because in the end, the world will not change to accommodate your sensitivity. The unscrupulous will not wake up tomorrow with a moral conscience just because you want them to. Power structures will not dissolve just because they are unjust. But you can change. You can stop waiting for permission to take up space. You can stop apologizing for existing fully. You can start building the kind of power that doesn't need to crush anyone to sustain itself, but also doesn't allow itself to be crushed. And perhaps most importantly, you can stop measuring your success by the metrics of tyrants. They measure success in domination, accumulation, control. You don't have to play that game. You can define success as living in alignment with your values while also thriving materially. As building genuine relationships rather than cold strategic alliances. As creating something that matters rather than just accumulating status symbols. As being respected for who you really are, not feared for a mask you wear. This is possible. It's not easy. It requires you to confront all the fears that have kept you paralyzed. It requires you to develop skills that no one has taught you. Negotiation, assertive communication, setting boundaries, tolerance for discomfort. It requires you to let go of the need to be seen as good all the time and accept that sometimes doing the right thing means displeasing people, creating conflict, being misunderstood. But every step in that direction brings you closer to something you haven't had in a long time, real freedom. The worst people don't win because the world is unfair. They win because you still believe you shouldn't have to fight. And while you wait for justice that never comes, you continue to give away your power, for free. Maybe it's time to take it back, not with cruelty, not by stepping on anyone, but with the courage to stop waiting for permission to fully exist, with the clarity that you deserve what you seek, not because the universe owes it to you, but because you will build it with your own hands. And with the wisdom that strength without ethics is tyranny, but ethics without strength is just good intentions that never materialize into real change. The choice has always been yours, from the beginning. You just needed to realize it. So before you close this video and go back to your normal life, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be brutally honest with yourself when you answer it. When did you decide it was safer to be invisible than to be seen? And how much has that cost you so far? Leave your answer in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. Because sometimes just articulating the truth out loud changes something. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You watch the videos. You reflect on each idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to go with this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit codes are ready for you. The link is in the video description. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.